Introduction to the Old Testament, Unit 3, Creation and the Fall. The account of creation in Genesis is from a monotheistic approach, and God creates by His Word. In Hebrews 11:3, it says, "By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible." The biblical doctrine of creation is based on divine revelation. This distinguishes it from the scientific. It can only be perceived by faith. All three parts of the Trinity took part in creation. Hebrews 11:3, together with Genesis 1:1, indicates that the world was not made out of pre-existing material. Nothing was in existence before creation. This is termed creatio ex nihilo. This tells us that matter is not eternal. It had a beginning. God is also distinct from His creation. Man was not created ex nihilo, but out of the dust of the ground, along with the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air. Man is a secondary creation. Creation is a free act of God, determined only by His sovereign will, and was not a necessary act. He did not need to create the universe. He chose to do so. The universe is dependent on His power for its continued existence. The Genesis account of creation in Genesis 1:1 to 2:4a, this section makes a series of assertions about how the visible world came into being. It seems to be a simple eyewitness account. It describes the origin of these elements that were visible to the naked eye. The writer used his eyes as he sought to describe the way in which God brought the world into being. The first item to be created is light. It is essential for all life and growth. Who caused it to be? God did in chapter 1, verses 3 to 5. Then we learn that there were waters above the earth and waters below. The waters below formed the seas and the underground springs. And there are waters above which produce rain. Between the two is a firmament. Again, we are told God is responsible for this in verses 6 through 8. And the observer is aware that the seas and land masses are distributed in specific areas of the earth's surface. We're told in verses 9 through 10. God also did this. The earth has produced vegetation of many kinds in verses 11 through 13, but the writer mentions only three groupings of plants. Grass, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. The next observation is that the heavenly bodies are set in the firmament, the sun, moon, and stars. Verses 14 through 19. God placed them there to mark off times and seasons. Moving to the living creatures, we find that the writer observes that the waters teem with living creatures, and birds fly across the earth, across the vault of the sky. Verse 20. God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the waters teem, and that moves about in it according to its kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. There is no attempt to make fine distinctions between the various species of sea animals in a zoological sense. God made the creatures on the land, verses 24 and 25, and finally God made mankind in his own image. Male and female, he created them. The creation account is not strict chronology. It is a schematic presentation in which the creative acts are compressed into a pattern of 6 days. There are 8 creative acts introduced by the words, "and God said." There is a scheme in the arrangement of the material. The first 3 days are preparatory. The giving of light and the preparation of firmament, seas, land, and vegetation are preliminary to the putting of inhabitants in a prepared home. There is a correlation in days 1 and 4, and days 3 and 6 each have 2 creative acts. The 7th day indicates God's work is finished. The whole account is poetic and does not need close scientific comparison. The emphasis is on what God said, verses 3, 6, 9, 11, 14, 20, 24, and 26. Many words are used to stress the divine activity, but the essential activity comes from the Word of God. God said. Now, there is some difficulty in translating and interpreting the word day. This word has many meanings in the Bible. It can mean a day of 24 hours. It is used of a divine judgment, that is the day of the Lord. It can be an indefinite period of time, like the day of temptation. It could be a long period of 1,000 years. We have the phrase, as it was in the day of Noah. Well, that means the lifetime of Noah. And we know that he took 100 years to build the ark. So that day is a long period. On the basis that a day is 24 hours, some claim that the creation was carried out in 6 literal days. This does not agree with the facts of geology, nor does it allow for the use of poetic, symbolic, or schematic arrangements in biblical literature. It is merely a period of 6 days in the creation, and then the 7th day is when God rested. Others have argued that the day is a long period and have tried to find a correlation with the geological records. This is tied too closely to current scientific theories, and these may change dramatically. We do not know how to interpret the phrase evening and morning. We usually think of it as the day of the Hebrews starting at sundown and then going until sunrise. Others say the creation account was revealed to the author over a period of 6 days. A suggestion has been made that each day was inscribed on a clay tablet. The concordist view has sought to find a more or less exact correlation between science and the Bible. Some believe that Genesis 1 and 2 has a gap in the world's history. They translate, the earth became void and without form. It was created perfect, but then something happened between verses 1 and 2, and then God recreated or reformed what had been created into something else. This gap between verses 1 and 2 allows for long geological periods. Others believe that there is a second creation mentioned in chapter 2, that the creation in chapter 1 is different from the creation in chapter 2. And chapter 2 really is an introduction to the temptation story. Well, we have several theories about creation, and in the book by Walton, Chronological and Background Charts of the Old Testament, he gives us 5 creation theories. The prior creation is what we call the gap theory. That is where there is a time period between verses 1 and verse 2. This was the theory I grew up on, and most of the people in that denomination still hold to this, that there is a gap. That God created in chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then there was some kind of a catastrophe or something that happened, and the earth became void and without form. And then in chapter 1, verse 2, God begins the actual creation that we experience now in the world. There is the naive literal day theory, and I use the term naive because this means that's what it looks like at first account. It's not used in a negative sense. In this, you have 6 days of creation, and each day is 24-hour period. So that means that it doesn't take into account anything else. It's just that it's a solid 6-day creation period. Then there is the 2-phase theory, and the 2-phase is that between Genesis 2:3 and 2:4, there is a break, so that the first section is a creation account, and then beginning with chapter 2, verse 4, there is another creation account. So we could throw everything that we want to about the dinosaurs or long ages into that first creation account, and then say that the creation that we experience begins with verse 4. So there are really 2 different creation accounts, 2 phases. And then there is the age day, and this means that each of the days is an era. It can be millions and millions of years. So this will account for everything that we have seen in the fossils and all of those things that we say were long, long ago. Well, that's in the age day theory. And then there is the Revelatory Day Theory. And this means that the author received the information about creation on 6 successive days. Now, it's hard to argue against something like that, but there is no evidence in the Scripture that there was such an interpretation of creation. And then there is what I like to call the literary format theory. This is taking it as a 6-day period, but it's in a literary format. It uses symbols, it uses language that indicates something happened, but not literally. This would mean that you have in the first verse, God created the heavens and the earth. And then it says that on the first day, he created light. On the second day, he created the waters, or divided the waters that were above the earth from the waters that were below the earth, and he put a firmament in between. And then on the third day, the earth and vegetation appear. So we have the actual earth coming out of water, separated from water. Now all of that then would be in preparation. And then if we take the second 3 days, we find that they are in a correlation with the first 3 days. We have light on the first day, which is essential for all of life. And then on day 4, the sun, the moon, and the stars are mentioned specifically. Now we can assume that the sun, moon, and stars were actually created on that first day of light, because that's where we receive our light. But they are mentioned on day 4 because God sets them apart to distinguish time from time. We know that the sun is where we receive our basic light, and the earth orbits around that sun once every year. The moon, we also receive light from it, and it marks out a month. So these are objects that are useful for us in distinguishing time. And then day 5, we have the fish and the birds created, and that corresponds to day 2, where the waters are divided. You have the fish that teem in the waters under the earth, and you have the birds that fly in the air above the firmament. And then on day 3, we had earth and vegetation appear. That is essential for the creation of living beings, the animals and man. So all of the animals are created on day 6, so that we now populate the earth with living creatures. And man, of course, needs vegetation to exist. Then verse 7 is the climax, and it says that God rested on the 7th day. He would finish all of his creation. So we have man that is created then in the first chapter, and then we have another creation account beginning with chapter 2, verse 4, and that is talking about the preparation for the garden experience. The Garden of Eden is created by God. It is an ideal place. It is perfect. It has trees, it has water, and that is what is essential for mankind to live. And it says that God created man, and he has already told us that God created man in the first account of creation. But in this account, he is more specific, and he tells us that man was made in the image of God, and then Adam was asked to name all of the animals that had been created. Part of this is so that he can recognize there is nothing similar to him in all of the animal kingdom. And therefore God has to make a mate for him. So we are told that God used a part of man, and whether it is a rib or something else is hard to determine. And from that part, God then made woman. So man is now complete. We have the male and the female, and they are one flesh, and that is emphasized. And this is why Jesus, when he's asked about why did Moses allow the people to divorce their wife, God says, because of your hardness of heart. But that's not the way that it was in the beginning. In the beginning, it's male and female, and the two become one flesh, and therefore you can't divide male from female. This we have now a perfect situation. They have all of the food they want. It seems to be an ideal climate. They don't have to worry about clothing. In fact, it mentions that they were nude. And it also mentions that God was with them. He would come down and in the evening and walk with man. So this is a situation that he desired, that man would have relationship with him. And he felt that this was right. Now we have something that happens. The man, Adam, and the wife, Eve, are told that there are two trees in the Garden of Eden, one of which they are not to eat, and that is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life is something that they could eat anytime, but into this situation comes evil. And this evil is in the form of a serpent. At least we are told that when the serpent is cursed, he is to crawl on the ground. So we take it in the form of a modern serpent, in the form in which the devil appeared to Eve. He asks the question, did God say? Well, this causes Eve to think about the situation, and when she replies that there is a tree that they're not supposed to eat of, she also says we're not supposed to touch it. So this is a little bit more than God had actually said. The devil explains to her that God is not being fair with them. He is withholding something, that if they eat from this fruit, they will gain knowledge. And we know from the account that they do gain knowledge, but it is a knowledge that was not required for them. And this is the knowledge of good and evil. When God comes into the garden, the sin of the couple is revealed because they hide. They don't want to meet with God. And so God asks them the question then, have you eaten of that tree? And he asks Adam first, since he's responsible. And Adam does not say, yes, I ate of the tree and I'm sorry. He says, Eve was deceived and she gave me some and I ate. So he blames Eve for the sin. So God turns to Eve and asks her, and of course she blames the serpent. Well, God then turns to the serpent, and the serpent has no one to blame but himself, and he is cursed by God. It mentions here that the serpent will have his head crushed, but he will hurt the heel of the man. Now this is a prophecy of what is going to take place later when Jesus is on earth. He is crucified by men. So this is the way his heel is hurt. But in the process of the crucifixion, the serpent is finished, and he has his head crushed. And so we have a problem in the garden. They were in an ideal location, but because they have sinned and have broken the relationship with God, they are no longer allowed to stay in the garden and eat from the tree of life, and so live eternally in a sinful condition. So they are ejected from the garden. And we are told that an angel is put there with a sword that flashes back and forth, and no one is allowed then to go into the Garden of Eden. They move continually to the east. And so the fall is something that is not taken care of until the New Testament, when Jesus performs the miracle of his dying for mankind and then being raised again on the third day and then ascending to heaven. That is going to take care of the sinful state of mankind. And that basically is the context that we find in the creation account and then the fall of man.